Hey everyone, welcome to Fine Print. Today's episode is going to be a little different. We're going to be catering the episodes for the next week or so to AP World History students that are taking their exam next Wednesday. Since this is a history podcast, I thought it would be a good idea to hit two birds with one stone. Essentially, talk about most of world history to the regular listener, and for the AP World students, it'll be a good review session. The World History AP curriculum covers 9 units. However, for the sake of time and simplicity, we're going to be combining some units. Today's episode covers Unit 1, the Global Tapestry, and Unit 2, Networks of Exchange. So without further ado, we're going to be starting here with Unit 1, the Global Tapestry. So before we actually start getting to the material, I just wanted to mention that Unit 1 is only about 8% to 10% of the actual exam. However, it is definitely important to know, as you can make connections to this unit in your FRQs, your LEQs, your DBQs, and the free response section of the exam. So each unit is split into subunits. There's about 5 to 8 per unit. And for Unit 1, the first subtopic is the Tang and the Song dynasties. So before we talk about the Tang and Song dynasties, it's important to know the dynasty that came before both of them, which is the Sui dynasty. So the Sui dynasty was very short-lived. It essentially lasted for about 27 to 30 years, which isn't that long considering the other empires at the time. However, the dynasty did unify China after a period of political fragmentation, mainly through strong military campaigns. What's also important to note is that the Sui dynasty is known for constructing the Grand Canal, which connected the agricultural south to the populated north. So this really helped China's agricultural economy as the population moved south, began increasing the agricultural outputs, and delivered more prosperity to the country. However, its reason for only lasting for 27 to 30 years can be owed to internal conflict and instability that eventually led to its decline. So now we move on to the Tang dynasty. The Tang dynasty is probably one of the most important ones to know for Unit 1 of AP World History. So the Tang dynasty was recognized for being the golden age of China. Whenever we refer to the term golden age in AP World History, it is referring to a period of peace, prosperity, and overall good things were happening for the empire. So in the Tang dynasty, they followed a very cosmopolitan culture. So they welcomed foreign influences, for the biggest one being Christianity. And they also allowed trade with other continents. And this is very important to note because, as I'm about to mention, the Song dynasty was starkly opposite from the Tang in the sense that they completely rejected foreign influence. Coming back to the Tang dynasty, they led a lot of military conquests. An example is a campaign against the Turks that were invading China. And as I mentioned before, their liberal attitude towards all religions, for example, Empress Wu Zetian's spread of Buddhism, made the empire flourish and be known as the Golden Age of China. Some key inventions of the Tang dynasty include movable woodblock printing, which was essentially like a stamp, and it allowed for faster production of literature and stuff like that. And porcelain and gunpowder were actually exported from China to countries most commonly like countries in Europe, so Great Britain, France, Germany, Netherlands. And tea production also increased wealth in the Chinese upper class because it was very prized among the kings and the nobles. So now we move on to the Song dynasty. So the Song dynasty, you're going to notice it's very opposite from the Tang in the fact that they did not want any foreign influence. So most of their economic growth was through trade, expansion, and paper money. So paper money is, of course, an invention that branched off of woodblock printing. They also struggled to strengthen the military despite wanting to improve on Tang faults. A lot of the emperors were noticing and taking note of the mistakes that the Tang dynasty made. However, they weren't able to implement these solutions, and their military was quite weak. It was also the time in China when Confucianism was revived into a form known as Neo-Confucianism, which was a more tolerant form of Confucianism that allowed for some foreign or newer ideas. And as I mentioned before, they limited and discouraged foreign influence and ideas. And they had a strong and centralized government. And one very important term to know, they introduced a term known as meritocracy. So before meritocracy, people that were rich or upper class used to automatically get government jobs, which was often not the best fit. But meritocracy said that it's essentially, the definition is in the word. So they wanted to judge people based off of their merit, not based off of their social status or anything like that. And this actually increased the stability in the government sector of the dynasty. Now we're going to move on to subunit 1.2, which was Dar al-Islam. So translated, Dar al-Islam means the world of Islam. And this was the time period in Mecca and Medina when Islam and Sharia were introduced. So, important things to know about Islam. Islam is a monotheistic religion founded by Prophet Muhammad. The Quran, which is the holy book for Muslims, records Allah's revelations to Muhammad. And Sharia, which is a very important term that is going to follow through into other units of AP World History, is Sharia, which is the code of law that covers rules for fasting, prayer, charity, and behavior. So essentially the 5 pillars of Islam. So in the world of Islam, or Dar al-Islam, the goal of Muslims was to spread Islam throughout the world. So this can be seen in the spread of Sufism, this can be seen in the spread of Islam to North Africa and India. And the essential goal was to spread the belief and the ideology to as many people as possible. Another very important term is jizya. So jizya was a tax paid by non-Muslims living in Muslim territory. So in, for example, the Ottoman Empire, there were many Christians living, and they had to pay this jizya because they were non-Muslims living under Muslim leadership. And in return, they got security and a hefty amount of property. So some examples of Islamic caliphates, there's 2 main ones that you're probably going to need to know, are the Umayyad Caliphate and the Abbasid Caliphate. So the Umayyad Caliphate was the first one, and it was centered in Damascus, which is the present-day capital of Syria, and extended its control over the Arab world. The Umayyads were known for their military conquests and cultural achievements. They were actually the ones that spread Arabic language and literature across their control area. However, internal conflicts and the persecution of Shia Muslims and the people of the book being non-Muslim monotheistic religions, were causes for the Umayyad Caliphate's decline, and they were eventually overthrown by the Abbasid Caliphate. So the Abbasids were centered in Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq today, and they also extended control over the Arab world. They established the House of Wisdom, which was a very key location at the time. It was a center of learning and scholarship where many intellectuals and philosophers from across the world traveled to this House of Wisdom in order to learn new ideas in math, science, history, literature, and languages, and was a very key factor of spreading Islam as well. And similarly to the Umayyads, internal conflicts and the decline of power led to the decline of the Abbasids, and they were eventually overthrown by the Mongols. So some new Islamic powers, I'm just going to name these, were the Egyptian Mamluks, the Seljuk Turks, and the Delhi Sultanate. So these were established in different areas. So the Egyptian Mamluks were centered in Egypt. The Seljuk Turks were in Central Asia, such as Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. And the Delhi Sultanate was in North India and mainly centered in Delhi. So now we're going to move on to Unit 1.3, which was South and Southeast Asia. So we're going to start off with South Asia. In South Asia, there was the Indus River Valley, and this name is probably familiar as the Indus River Valley is often associated as the birthplace of Hinduism. So, in the Indus River Valley, there were people known as Dravidians, which were the indigenous people of India, and they were split into two groups, the Harappan and Mohenjo-daro. So after the Dravidian decline, the Aryans migrated to India. They brought horses and became farmers in India. And people say that they brought Sanskrit, which was the sacred language for Hindus that is used in religious texts. During this time, in the Vedic age, the Vedas, the Upanishads, and Bhagavad Gita led to the eventual spread of Hinduism. Furthermore, when we're talking about the Vedic age, it's important to note the caste system. So in the caste system, there were 5 levels, if you want to call it a level, or 5 subgroups in Indian society. There were Brahmins, which were teachers, Kshatriyas, which was the warrior class, and then Vaishyas, Shudras, and Dalits. So this was essentially a way of organizing the empire and organizing the jobs that each person had. So moving on, in South Asia, there was the Mauryan Empire. So Chandragupta Maurya was an Indian military officer who unified the Indian subcontinent and founded the Mauryan dynasty. He was a very effective administrator who ruled the continent by using a strong army and was known for enforcing harsh rules. His grandson is probably the more famous one worldwide. His name is Ashoka, and he was known for expanding the empire further and promoting Buddhism. So after Ashoka fought at a nearby kingdom named Kalinga, he realized that it was maybe too violent, and to mend his violence, he essentially converted to Buddhism and he spread Buddhism across India. After the Mauryan Empire, the Gupta dynasty came into power. The Guptas, similar to the Tang dynasty in China, were known as the golden age of Indian history, as Buddhism declined and Hinduism was re-established as the official religion. There were many mathematical, scientific, and astrological achievements, and trade with Rome and China boosted the economy. However, as we've seen in world history, a weakened government and invasions from foreign powers led to the decline of the Gupta dynasty. When we look at the Indian Ocean Trade Network, this was very crucial for connecting the countries of the Indian Ocean region to each other and the rest of the world, most notably Europe. It was used to transport textiles, spices, gold, silver, porcelain, tea, and many other prized goods to and from India and the regions nearby. The Khmer Empire, the Srivijaya Empire, and the Majapahit Kingdom were strong kingdoms in the region. And as mentioned before, Islamic merchants and Sufis brought Islam to many countries in Southeast Asia and India. So now moving on to Unit 1.4, which was State Building in the Americas. This is probably more familiar to many people as this covers the Mayan, Aztecs, and the Incas. So very brief explanations here. The Mayan Empire, they were known for their large temples, their trade networks, huge cities, and they thrived in the rainforests in the Yucatan Peninsula, so close to present-day Mexico. However, internal conflict eventually caused Mayan decline. The most famous one was probably the Aztecs. Their capital was located at Tenochtitlan, and they built various pyramids, which were built on Lake Texcoco, which was a very prominent lake for the Aztecs. Now, if they had such an extensive lake system, they definitely used it to their advantage to grow crops and boost their agriculture. So this is where the invention of the chinampas comes in. Chinampas were floating gardens that were used to grow crops on the lake, which fertilized them and provided them with the necessary water and nutrients that they needed. The Aztecs were also known for human sacrifice. They believed that human sacrifice was necessary to win military conflicts, and they sacrificed these lives to the sun god. And The Aztecs were known for being militaristic, majority merchant class, and they promoted education. The Inca Empire dominated longitude in the Andes Mountains. So they were essentially on the strip, on the western strip of South America, mostly present-day Chile. And due to this area being very mountainous, they came up with the invention of terrace farming. So what they did was they carved the mountains in a triangular stepping stone sort of arrangement, which was very beneficial because whenever it rained, the water used to fall from each step, and the water used to reach each crop that was planted in the mountain. They also had two very key systems that are very important to know. First is the invention of the quipu. The quipu system was essentially a record-keeping system with knots and ropes, and this was used for record keeping and communication. They also had a system known as the mita system. So the mita system said that all members of the Inca community were required to contribute their labor and their work towards Inca socialism. All male citizens were required to perform labor, and it was used to construct and maintain public works, used to redistribute wealth and prevent the concentration of power with a few wealthy people. Now moving on to state building in Africa, 1.5 of this unit. So trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean trade networks were very key for the empire at this time. Islam spread to northern Africa mainly through Sufi migration. This trade network, the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, facilitated the trade of salt, gold, ivory, and slaves. And the Indian Ocean Trade Network connected the East Asian coast with Western Indian Ocean, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. It facilitated the trade of spices, textiles, gold, and other luxuries. One famous man from the Trans-Saharan trade routes is most notably Ibn Battuta. He was a Moroccan scholar and explored the medieval world. He visited most Islamic and non-Islamic lands and documented his trips in a notebook. So some key empires and kingdoms in Africa. The Ghana kingdom was known for its powerful army and its wealth, and it was eventually conquered by the kingdom of Mali. The kingdom of Mali was founded by Sundiata Keita. It was known for its wealth derived from the trans-Saharan control over gold and salt. It was also known for its scholarship and cultural achievements. However, it was eventually replaced with the Songhai Empire. The Songhai Empire was founded by Sani Ali. It was known for its wealth derived from trans-Saharan control over gold and salt. However, it was eventually conquered by Moroccan invaders and collapsed because of the immense depopulation due to the slave trade. In Ethiopia, there was a federal parliamentary republic, and it was known for being the lone Christian kingdom in a region that was converting to Islam. Moving on to 1.6, developments in Europe. So in Europe, there was a key concept that was spreading, known as feudalism. So feudalism was prevalent in Europe during the Middle Ages, which was a time of deep economic and social crisis in Europe. It essentially said that the king or the monarchs owned all the land and granted fiefs, which were parcels of land, to nobles in exchange for their loyalty and military service. These nobles then granted the fiefs to vassals in exchange for their labor, and they granted their labor to the serfs, who were tied to the land they worked on for an agreed period of time. It's important to note that serfs were not slaves. These are two completely separate terms in two completely separate regions. There was also something known as the three-field system. Farmers rotated crops during harvest to avoid soil overuse. Coming up next was the Holy Roman Empire. It was tied to the Catholic Church and the feudal system. However, it was consisted of a loose federation of territories in Central and Western Europe brought together by a monarchy. The church and regional kingdoms held power over the central government. In 1215, there was a document created by King John of England known as the Magna Carta. It was an agreement between the kings and his subjects that established certain rights and freedoms for English people and limited the power of the monarchy. It established the principle that the power of the monarchy was not absolute and that the king was subject to the law as well. This led to the 100 Years' War, which were a series of conflicts fought between England and France over the French throne, control of key French and English cities, and the claim of the English kings to the French throne. It soon ended with a treaty that recognized French control over most of the territories and established the English Channel. Next, we're going to be talking about the spread of Islam and the Crusades. Islam began to spread in Europe. However, the Christians viewed this as a threat, and King Charles stopped Islamic advances in the Battle of Tours and removed Muslims through Reconquista. The Crusades were a period of time when the Catholic Church started a war to take the Holy Land back from the Muslims. It also attacked Orthodox Christians in Constantinople. However, they failed to win back Jerusalem and only weakened the power of the church. Islamic influence was introduced through math and science to Christians, and the Crusades and Mediterranean trade opened up Europe from self-imposed isolation, set the stage for the Renaissance. The Renaissance was most notably a very important time in Europe due to the cultural and intellectual movements that began in Italy and spread through Europe. They revived classical learning, emerged individual thinking, and led people to begin questioning traditional ways of life. The Renaissance was considered a bridge between the Middle Ages and the modern era in Europe. Johannes Gutenberg's printing press increased speed and efficiency of printing, leading to higher literacy rates across Europe. This concludes Unit 1, the Global Tapestry. Now we will be moving on to Unit 2, which is Networks of Exchange. So Unit 2 is called Networks of Exchange, and one of the first subtopics is the Silk Roads. So what was the Silk Road? The Silk Road was a network of trade routes that connected Asia, Europe, and Africa from ancient times through the Middle Ages. It transported goods, cultures, ideas, people, and technologies. Empires were rapidly expanding, which led to a growing desire for goods. This began the trade of luxury goods like sugar, gold, porcelain, spices, and silk. Furthermore, there were many new inventions and technology during this time period. One of the main ones was the invention of the caravanserai. This was essentially a roadside inn where travelers or animals could rest on long trips. Furthermore, there were also new finance inventions and technologies. Firstly, bills of exchange were financial instruments used in international trade during the medieval and modern periods. It was in order to pay a certain sum of money in the future. Banking houses were financial institutions that could exchange currencies, transfer funds, and obtain credit or financial services. This was increasingly important for the Silk Roads as there were many countries involved in the transactions. It also led to the creation of new cities, most notably Kashgar and Samarkand. They grew massively as they became hubs for trade. And textile production, as the demand for silk grew, began to rapidly increase, mainly in China and India, which fueled their lasting economies. The Silk Roads also led to the spread of ideas, religions, and diseases. Merchants carrying goods spread religions like Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism. Furthermore, a famous explorer by the name of Marco Polo traveled the Silk Roads and wrote about his encounters and findings. What's more on the negative side, though, is one of the worst diseases that humankind has possibly ever seen, the Black Plague, also known as the bubonic plague. This was a disease that had originated somewhere near Mongolia or China and was carried by infected rats. Once it reached the coast of Europe, the dense population caused a wave of deaths in major cities and throughout the continent, leading to massive depopulation and ultimate devastation for the country. Moving on to Unit 2.2, the Mongol Empire. Some main Mongol military strategies are as follows. As they were well acquainted with horses and bows, held siege weapons, and many rumors of Mongol strength made many cities surrender instead of fighting back, this led to the Mongols being the most feared and powerful empires in all of history. Furthermore, organized and efficient military campaigns, skilled horsemen, and traders only added to the threat of the Mongols. A famous emperor that you should probably know is Genghis Khan. He was the leader of the Mongols and united the Mongol tribes under a centralized authority and went on to conquer much of the known world. After Genghis Khan died, the Mongol Empire split up into 4 sections: the Golden Horde, the Yuan dynasty, the Ilkhanate, and the Chagatai Khanate. A Khanate is a political entity ruled by a leader known as the Khan or the Emperor. Some historical developments during the Mongol Empire. The Mongols were more religiously tolerant than many other empires at the time or in the location. Women were treated much better as compared to other empires. However, they still remained inferior to the men. Trade across the Mongol Empire was peaceful, which led to an era known as Pax Mongolica, which translates to Mongol peace. Greco-Roman and Islamic medical knowledge, mathematics from the Middle East, and the Turkish Uyghur script came to the Mongols via the Silk Road. Moving on to Unit 2.3, Exchange in the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean trade was a network of trade routes connecting regions around the Indian Ocean. Favorable geography and climate, political and economic systems supporting trade, adoption of technologies, and a variety of goods made it a bustling trade route. Trade over the ocean made weather unpredictable. Knowledge of monsoon winds was essential to using them to your advantage. Inventions that came up as a result of the Indian Ocean trade were the lateen sails and an astrolabe. Lateen sails were triangular sails that were used on small sailing craft that helped sailors sail through heavy monsoon winds and rains. The astrolabe was used to measure stars, planets, and celestial positions that helped keep time. Moving on to Unit 2.4, the Trans-Saharan trade routes. The Trans-Saharan trade routes were used to transport gold, ivory, salt, and slaves, and brought goods, new ideas, and technologies, which led to the ultimate spread of religions and languages. The trade route was used by the Romans, Arabs, and the Europeans, as well as the Africans. It led to the formation of diasporic communities, most notably West African merchants settling in the Middle East or African slaves in Latin America as a result of the triangular trade. Camels were efficient to travel long distances across the desert to carry heavy loads and people with minimal water. Camel saddles were comfortable and durable for long-distance traveling, and caravans were helpful for long-distance transport and were very important in the deserts. When it comes to the spread of Islam through the Trans-Saharan trade routes, the routes connected West Africa to Dar al-Islam, and traders brought Islam to African cities, mostly Sufis. Timbuktu in Africa was a major learning center which focused on mainly Islamic learnings and teachings. Major Islamic African empires included the Mali Empire and the Sokoto Caliphate. A very important man that is essential to know was Mansa Musa. He was the king of the Mali Empire, known for his tremendous wealth and promoting trans-Saharan trade routes. After converting to Islam, he made the Hajj, or a pilgrimage to Mecca, where he distributed his wealth upon return, opened mosques, and public work programs in Africa. So that was the end of Unit 1 and Unit 2 of the WHAP AP exam review. If you guys enjoyed that and liked the way it was formatted, or have any suggestions about how we can format it better next time, maybe shorten it, go more into detail about certain things, please put that in the poll below that you'll see if you scroll down under this episode. And apart from that, I hope you guys are able to use this to your advantage, and I hope this really helps out.